Hello, and welcome to the Academic Commentary Assignment 2, the presentation, AI Implementation through Change Management and Innovation Lenses. I'm Stephen King. I'm the Director of Studies at the Chichester English Language School, and I'll be taking you through this presentation. This presentation is basically going to be looking at the further thoughts and next steps following on from the written part of the academic commentary. We'll be looking at the background and strategic position of the organisation, a little bit of reflection on those researched models that we covered in the written assignment, a hybrid framework option that's come about as a result of that research, the AI platforms that we looked at and the selection criteria, a proposal as to why now is the time to implement, and of course our roadmap implementation plan. To serve as a bit of background, I'm Stephen King. I'm the Director of Studies or Head of Learning for the Chichester English Language School, part of the Chichester College Group. I manage a team of 25 staff composed of permanent teachers. They form the core. We have a group of bank and summer school teachers who operate during peak times. There's a small team of business support staff, 3 budgets, and responsibility for 2,500 student tuition weeks per year. Some students come for 2 weeks, some of them come for 6 months. Chichester English Language School, or CELS as it is known, is one of the commercial entities operated by Chichester College. We're accredited by the British Council, which means that we have inspections by them every 4 years, the last one being in March 2023. And currently, following our previous inspection, we have 13 out of 15 areas of strength. It was our best inspection result to date, and it put CELS in the top 8% of British accredited centres in England. However, classroom observations, teaching essentially, were not seen as an area of strength, and the current plan is to improve classroom provision for that strategic impact at the next inspection. Our strategic group analysis, you'll see that Chichester English Language School, the blue box just above my head, is at the bottom of the gold standard and to the left of the chart. That puts us in the top 10% in terms of quality, but the lowest 10% in terms of price. The objective here is to improve classroom provision and therefore move the school up and to the right into that strategic gap that would basically net us an increase in revenue and improve our reputation. From a strategic point of view, Chichester English Language School is an important component of the Chichester College Group. There have been a lot of financial pressures following recent mergers and acquisitions, and those of us that are commercially involved are under pressure to increase our revenue. However, our financial model is dictated by the British Council because we're only allowed 16 students per class. There are also resource challenges. It's difficult to recruit suitable teachers. There is a shortage of classrooms, and accommodation, especially homestay accommodation, is at a premium. The college's target is to reach 6% of EBITDA, and over 80% of the group's surplus comes from its commercial division, of which CELS is a pivotal part. Moving quickly on to the researched models in the academic commentary. The first of these was ADKAR, the change management model. And ADKAR, of course, stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. This is a very popular practitioner consultancy sort of centered change management framework. However, it probably prioritizes simplicity over theoretical depth. There's not much peer review that goes on with this. It's very linear in its approach, and although it's very, very useful, it has been criticized for being oversimplified, lacking in empirical validation, and perhaps neglecting some of the wider systemic factors such as the politics and the power that one has to take account of in change, leadership, and of course organizational culture. Okay, now let's look at Rogers, which is our innovation theory that we covered in the academic commentary. If ADKAR is a micro level individual perspective, then Rogers is very much the macro perspective and looks at the structured approach to anticipate how different groups within an organization will respond to change. They kind of merge together quite well. It also highlights, we found, the vital role that the early adopters play, and they are very much your agents of change. However, the diffusion of innovation theory possibly oversimplifies certain aspects. It doesn't really account for those departmental subcultures that we find in education establishments. It's very technology centric in that it doesn't really focus on the pedagogy or the ethical considerations that we would need for AI implementation in education. It is, after all, quite an old model. Neither does it provide for the tactical implementation. I mean, that is covered very much by ADKAR, but in isolation, Rogers DOI does not really cover that at all. And the other aspect that may be a problem here is that if you have forced sort of adoption, you may end up with some sort of artificially accelerated adoption curve, because you might think that everybody's adopting the change, but actually this could be superficial compliance. So, accepting the fact that both ADKAR and Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory have their uses, and in fact they work together quite well, ADKAR being the micro level and Rogers' diffusion of innovation being the macro perspective, there is of course a gap, and the gap really is looking at the pedagogical aspects, those ethical considerations, the power structures, communication and culture, infrastructure development and rollout. That's very much something that we need to address with this change. Addressing those shortcomings, therefore, we propose a hybrid framework for AI implementation. This is formed of three main elements: strategic leadership, funding and infrastructure development, culture, collaboration and communication, and thirdly, the implementation. You'll note that the sub-elements within this are all from other change management frameworks. We have, for example, in strategic leadership, funding and infrastructure development element, the TOE framework, technology, organization and environment, from Tornatsky and Fleischer, 1990. Of course, you'll notice at the bottom of there, we have urgency, guiding coalitions, celebrating short-term wins, consolidating change and sustaining the momentum. Well, of course, it sounds familiar because that's Kotter's 8 steps. When it comes to the culture, collaboration and communication, identifying those key players and being able to leverage early adopters, well, of course, that's Rogers' diffusion of innovation. And of course, we also need this shift in mindset, and this comes from Fontaine et al. 2019, breaking down those silos and creating those interdepartmental and cross-functional teams of AI champions. And lastly, of course, we've got our implementation section, ADKAR for the buy-in and the training, the SMAR framework from Tiendura's 2006 model, and of course, when it comes to the roadmap for rolling things out, we've got Sattel's 2017 Innovation Matrix. Okay, well, so when it comes to looking at the actual platforms that we want to consider for our department, we looked at a number of those suitable for teaching English as a foreign language. And they've been divided into 8 categories, 4 of which are shown on this slide: language learning platforms, tutoring and conversation practice platforms, writing and grammar feedback platforms, and those used for pronunciation and listening training. All of those have important parts to play in teaching of English as a foreign language. The other areas to consider are platforms used for personalised and adaptive learning, lesson planning and grading, very important for the teachers, virtual immersion and gamification, something that the students really enjoy, and of course that really important aspect of what we do, assessing and placing students when they first come onto the courses. All of these different platforms fit into those various categories, and they are all popular with teaching English as a foreign language. Now, of course, we're not in a position to take on all of those, so we have to look very much at what we are actually trying to do. What is the objective here? And that brings us to our next slide. Our selection criteria came down to 4 main elements. Ease of use and adaptability, because we want to reduce our training costs and we want to get as much use from any platform as possible. The pedagogical effectiveness, and that needed to be evidence-based. We needed to align it with our goals to make sure that we're actually going to improve provision with the use of these platforms. And then, of course, the financial considerations. Can we get a free tier? And if we're going to have a subscription, can we get a yearly subscription rather than monthly? Because the savings are about 40 to 45% on annual subscriptions. Right, I've had to shrink myself into the corner on this one because there's so much information on this slide. Here we have 12 of the rated EFL AI platforms mapped against our 4 selection criteria. You'll note that finance has been split into the free tier and how the subscriptions are run. There were 2 platforms that came across with green lights all the way through. Busuu, which is for speaking, and Write and Improve, which is the Cambridge English Exams writing assessment platform. Both very, very highly rated. Also, we've got QuizGecko, which is highly adaptable. Even though it's not yet peer reviewed, it's received a lot of positives from practitioners out there. So we're going to go with those. There are others there that deserve a look, and you'll see that they form part of the phase 2 implementation. This is just a quick slide showing the evidence for the pedagogical effectiveness for those platforms. 29% of those platforms we looked at had peer reviews or some sort of institutional or clinical study for them. Half of them showed some sort of moderate evidence, it was internal data, surveys and pilot studies, and 21% had very limited evidence. Okay, the rationale for this proposal, why now is the time? Well, simply put, we want to move ourselves across that strategic group analysis framework, and to do that we need to improve our classroom provision. Our next inspection is due in the summer of 2027, and that leaves us 24 months to get AI competent, inspection ready, and improve the quality of our provision. We're going to roll this out in 2 phases. Phase 1 with our 3 chosen platforms led by the early adopters. They are the key influencers in the department. And then phase 2 is going to be research led by the innovators. And we think that they'll be able to help us sustain the change. Okay, so here are our 3 favorites: Busuu, Write and Improve, and QuizGecko. These are going to form the platforms for phase 1 implementation. Busuu for the speaking, Write and Improve for the writing, and QuizGecko used for listening and reading. The costs, well, they've all got a free tier. If we need to pay for Busuu, it'll be £59 annually for 1 subscription, and we can share it around the department. And if we need to pay for QuizGecko, it's going to be £48 annually. It won't break the bank. For phase 2 of the implementation, we're looking at the innovators leading on this with their research and investigations into 3 other possible platforms. And these are Elsa Speak for speaking and pronunciation, TWE for reading and listening, and Memrise for vocabulary and speaking. Now, Elsa Speak doesn't have a free tier. That's why we want to spend some time looking at it before we commit. When we do, it'll be £69 annually for one subscription. TWE has a free tier, and then it's £99 a year, and Memrise is £49 a year after the free tier. That last one is particularly useful, I think, for our low-level learners, those that are particularly finding it difficult to make progress at the moment. So we're going to let the innovators run riot with those and see what they come up with. When it comes to costs, you'll see that we're looking at the cost of training and the cost of the platforms themselves. The cost of the platforms is very modest if we're going to go for the annual subscriptions of those initial platforms we've looked at. We're looking at £158 for two subscriptions. Our total, therefore, for the first 12 months is going to come in at under £4,000. And then in the second year, if we then add in those other platforms that were part of the phase 2, we'd be looking at a total of £8,058 over the 24-month period. If we move now to the financial considerations for the revenue projections for the price increase, you'll see that if we take the 2,500 student weeks on average that we have every year, and we add a £50 increase per week, which would put us more in line with those competitors in these top echelon, that would make a difference of £125,000 per year to our revenue. If we went further and added £60 per week, that would bring in about £150,000, accepting the fact that we would still have 2,500 student weeks per year. However, 40% of our students are Japanese. The yen is very low at the moment, and of course they also come as a group. So it's quite likely that we would apply a group discount to those partner institutions that we've been working with for about 30 years. And so therefore, we now look at revised projections applicable to 60% of our student weeks. So we would have 1,500 student weeks applied with a £50 price increase or a £60 price increase, bringing in additional revenues of £75,000 and £90,000 a year respectively. That is basically what we will be looking at. But of course, we don't know what the value of the yen is going to be in 2 years' time. If the yen rallies, then of course the Japanese wouldn't find it a problem at all to absorb those increases. When it comes to risk mitigation, we've got 4 internal risks: technological, organizational, pedagogical, and financial. Due to the fact that we've got a phased implementation plan, we're using free tiers initially, and we've got very modest investment. I think that our risks there are limited and can be easily managed. As far as pedagogical risks go, continuous training and monitoring of the implementation's impact on classroom provision and student progress will help us to make sure that we've made the right decisions with those platforms. External risk, well, that's to do with other things beyond the control of the AI, and you'll see there that we've got the Quality Directorate involved with helping us prepare for the inspection. And finally, if we look at the implementation roadmap, we've got 4 stages: establishing that foundation using Kotter, Rogers, TOE, the collaboration, culture and communication mentioned, and ADKAR. We then develop the people, again, ADKAR, culture, collaboration, communication, and the SMAR framework. We then educate the community, models are listed there, and we assess the progress. It's at that point that the phase 2, the innovators leading the research, we would get them involved at that stage to sustain and continue the change. Thank you very much. The next slide is the references, and thank you very much for watching.